We have a motion to approve the agenda, please. Oh, we have a roll first, sorry.
Mayor Taylor.
I am here.
Councilmember Medina.
Here.
Councilmember Watson.
Here.
Councilmember Briggs absent. Councilmember Iyer absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the agenda, moved by Watson and Martinez, discussion of the agenda. All in favor? Opposed? The agenda is approved. Good. Motion please to approve the minutes, moved by Watson Medina. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Minutes are approved. Unfinished business. Michelle.
Great to see everyone.
Yes.
So I believe everyone got the planning documents and the list of draft questions. And so my goal for our time together this afternoon is to approve the timeline and questions and answer any questions that you have about the documents that I provided or the process.
The open members, sorry. So for members, are there any questions or comments on the rubric? Well, that's happening. Milton, do you have any?
No, Amy and I had a conversation, so I'm familiar with what she's proposing to do. I don't have any issues.
All right. While it's being pulled up, perhaps on the substance, can we talk maybe about the timing itself?
Sure. So even though there was a slight delay in this meeting happening, I think the timeline could still work where upon approval of the questions, we would launch the survey this week. So an email would go out to all the participants. I'd be getting with Sarah to make sure I have the right email list. But then we would send out emails to council as well as department leads and let them know that the survey is coming. Then we would our software tool Prima Logic would then send out an invitation to the participants to complete the survey. Most people have been through this before, so it's that's always a good thing when people know what to expect. The survey would close on Sunday, September 8th, so that would give us a nice time frame to collect responses. Then we would prepare a summary document as well as provide the full underlying data to the city administrator. He would then provide a summary response. And then the summary and response would be compiled and then provided to the administrative committee. So I tried to work around potential scheduling dates that you had on the schedule there. Then the administrative committee would finalize the report and then provide it to council. There would be a summary that would be kind of appropriate to be read into the record at council, as well as, again, the administrator and the committee here would have the complete data set of information.
And so the target date for administration committee is the October meeting?
Yes. Yep, so we would plan on providing it to everybody by September 24th so that you would have it in time to review prior to the October 8th meeting date. And that would usually be the appropriate time to discuss a compensation adjustment as well that would be brought to council.
So that conversation would occur at the October 8th meeting.
Yeah.
Perfect. Anyone? Again.
I was going to the attachments. I apologize. And the last time I got an email from you was last year.
I'll send it over right now. Sure. I'm getting out of my neighborhood because someone authorized construction. I'm sorry about that. Just kidding. I'm gonna invite you to be the second to last person.
Can't fix the roads without fixing the roads.
Well, this is true.
So is there,
There's a lot in your inbox.
yeah.
Are there any substantial changes to this from last year's process?
No.
In that light, are we okay just ratifying as was? And I see one nod.
Yeah, so,
Another nod is sort of gentle acquiescence.
I mean, I'm getting through them again
Yeah,
right
I
now.
know. Trying to refresh myself. Okay, it sounds fine. I don't remember any issues last year.
Move this along, perhaps in light of the consistency with last year, what we do is we accept as is, and if there are major objections, we resurface and so that we get to it. Same time?
Yeah, I do.
All right, so let's, it's just something that requires motion to approve, or we have not and go about your business. Let's approve them just for fun. Moved by Watson Briggs. Is there discussion about the substance of the questions? All in favor? Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. My apologies.
I don't know. You saw me open my mouth. I appreciate that. I don't know if there's anything substantive to say. No, I did it right now.
All in favor? Opposed? The question set is approved. The timetable is approved. Is there anything else that's required? Ms. Bell, Milton?
I'm good. Sarah, if you could just confirm and send me an email list to distribute, that would be great. We'll get it out tomorrow. Great. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Way it is. New business proposed Michigan State Police grant for community-based crisis response. Mr. Devoni.
I think Mr. Pointer's on there. We've been, working back and forth trying to iron out some, language issues with the grant agreement. We have not been able to come to a consensus. There's been iterations back and forth. The administration was poised to relinquish the grant, but before that happens, the suggestion was to bring it here for discussion. So Mr. Pointer's on. Looks like Mr. Toomey is on. I'm not sure how you want to proceed. You want John to talk about it? Or
Sure.
Questions or?
Let's have some more background and then we'll chat. Pointers or follow on?
Hello, members of the committee. Thank you so much. My apologies for not being there in person. The first thing I want to say is that Representative Morgan's office has been extremely helpful throughout this entire process, and we are really grateful for the work they did, first of all, to get the initial allocation of funds, and second of all, in what has ended up being quite a bit of back and forth with the Michigan State Police. I know Jacob has been personally involved in this, and we owe him a lot of thanks. And Representative Morgan has also been personally involved in it, and he's done a lot of very good work for us on this issue. So a lot of thanks to them for the work that they've done. Where we are at is the Michigan State Police are insisting on a number of provisions within the grant agreement that we think are anathema to the city's stated policy approach to the unarmed crisis response program. There was an attorney-client privilege memo that was provided to the council members earlier today that I think does a very good job of not just summarizing the policy issues, but some of the important legal issues that the grant agreement would create for the city. But at the end of the day, the policy issues that we are focusing on is that the Michigan State Police will require to have pretty open access to all files and records created by the Unarmed Crisis Response Program. We are required to give them blanket access to all data to the program, which creates a situation where they would have access to information that we think could cause entanglements for those who might call the program and request services. We have gone back and forth with the police many, many times asking that this language be changed. They have been resistant to changing it. But in the last iteration of the grant, they backed off some language they had, but replaced it with the state boilerplate language, which, as a reminder, is the controlling language over the expensive funds that's actually in the state budget. So that cannot be changed, unfortunately. But in response to backing that information out, they added what's a pretty muscular indemnification clause for them, which would require the city to pay legal fees should they be sued for any reason related to the program. And so, we've gone back and forth several rounds with the police and had many discussions with them. I think the feeling from city staff is that we are not confident that the state police will agree to the language that we need to create a true separation between the police and the Unarmed Crisis Response Program. And so this is where we are with it. And we think it may be time for our elected officials to be made aware of the discussions in more detail and provide us some guidance as to whether we should bring the grant agreement forward for their approval or what.
I guess to add a footnote to that, it goes to the fundamental point that we made to the community multiple times. There was worry that we were creating a program where the police would essentially be in charge. The police would be able to determine how services were dispensed. We've said multiple times that's not what we're doing. We understand the sensitivity around it. So if the language remains as is, as passed, it's like we either misled the public or we were dishonest with the public, none of which is true. And since we don't yet have a model that we're bringing forward that creates another level of problems that we would have to work through.
I guess I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more. So I know that one of the issues that has kind of led to the indemnification clause being added in based on my conversations was really this back and forth around access to data and some of the changes that were made to the language of the contract in order to share, I guess, less data with the state police. I know that there's redactions that are required and they're allowed, but there are still concerns that the city has around that. I guess I have some concerns around, we've already kind of walked back money from that we had allocated from ARPA that we were going to use for unarmed response. We now have potential money coming from the state for unarmed response. that we may be looking to turn away. And I guess I have concerns around our ability to fund this as we continue to look at opportunities to get money in the door and get something set up and then turn it away. And I know other cities that qualified for the state funding accepted it. And so I guess, could you maybe speak a little bit to why we are different than other communities that have accepted this money and why we wouldn't look at opportunities to get this money in the door?
Well, sure, most certainly. So I think the first point is that if we accept the money under the current terms, our program will look very radically different than what has been proposed to the public thus far. Because it is another point here that is a source of disagreement with the Michigan State Police is that the boilerplate language contemplates that it implies at least that this would be a police co-response. And it says specifically that the police would be involved until the point that the police determine that they are no longer necessary to be there. What we have tried to work out with the Michigan State Police is that we would essentially get those policy approvals in advance from the police department. The police, working together with all of our city departments who are involved in this program would say, we're just simply not going to respond at all to X, Y, and Z type of calls and leave these to the Unarmed Crisis Response Program. The Michigan State Police have at least verbalized to us that that is really our decision if we want to do it that way. But it really took it took some effort to remove the specific stipulations related to that from the grant agreement. And I don't know why they added the indemnification language. We haven't had a follow-up conversation with them yet, but it's also worth considering that indemnification language may have been added as a result of the removal of that language from the grant, right? So what is in the grant is still the boilerplate language that implies there should be co-response, but the language that strictly requires it was taken out. So, Jacob, do you have some more information on that?
Yeah, if I may, thank you for having me here today, and I can clarify a little bit that Mr. Fournier is correct that indemnification language was added by the Michigan State Police due to the additional allowance and change from the other two communities that are receiving the grant money due to the fact that you would have the ability, specifically in Ann Arbor, to decide what calls go to the police force or what calls go to the Unarmed Crisis Response Unit. And you could set that up in advance if you want to say if this is a trespassing charge or somebody's urinating on a wall or something like that. I don't know, but a lower level crime like that is technically criminal in nature that would technically usually have to go through the police. That indemnification language was added because legally that is still a criminal scenario, even though that person may not be violent or dangerous or any of those things. And so that's why that language was added in there.
So I think that with many other communities in the state of Michigan, they're running these types of crisis response programs with some type of coordination with law enforcement. And that's really the difference is you have some triage involved that involves law enforcement about who's coming and who's not coming, who's being sent to a call, who's not being sent to the call. In many communities, they're hiring these crisis response teams comprised of social workers and human services professionals and what have you, and simply embedding them within the police department. And so we're doing it somewhat differently than a lot of other communities in Michigan are doing it. That's not to say that that's better, worse, or what, but if you're in a community that's more accepting of having some level of police involvement, the language in the boilerplate isn't necessarily problematic for you.
Please.
Yeah, I guess on that, so I know that we have concerns about kind of the indemnification language itself and some of the financial risk that comes along with that. I guess I wonder if hard for me to envision why the state police would want that if there were a situation where we determined ahead of time that police response wasn't necessary and then something escalated and all of a sudden there's a lawsuit that we should have sent police or the state police should have. I mean, I guess those are the types of things I'm envisioning could be lawsuits that could arise. I guess, are there other things that we're envisioning could fall under this that we're concerned about, and or is this still language that's negotiable? I mean, I hate to see that we're in a place where we would just say, we're going to walk away. Have we really reached that point in negotiations that no more progress can be made?
I have an observation for you on that, which is we have been negotiating with the Michigan State Police for months, literally months. We have exchanged language with them many times. We have sent draft language to them many times. We've met with them. You know, I think that as long as Representative Morgan is asking the Michigan State Police to meet with us, they would continue meeting with us. I am not convinced that there is an outcome here that would allow these disputes over language to be resolved in a favorable way for the city, though.
Sorry, I have one more question. I guess, so one of the other things we talked about is really the way that staff's belief that if we were to accept this money, it would set up unarmed crisis response in a very different way than we've envisioned it so far. Also acknowledging that this is a decent chunk of money, but not enough money to sustain this program long term. What type of long-term obligation are we under to continue in the way that the state police is envisioning, given that currently we have no program? So, I mean, if this were enough money for us to get something started for 6 months and then their money runs out, could we move in a different direction? I guess I'm just looking for ways, I mean, considering we don't have an unarmed response program, and this is an opportunity to start something. I guess I'm wondering what the long-term obligation is for us to run this the way that the state police are envisioning, as opposed to shifting at some point in the future.
That's a really good question. I think we're going to have to study that to get you a definite answer.
I thought there was a clause about how long they would have access to the records.
You know, it seems to me that there was a 3-year provision after the end of the program. That they would have access to all records in the program.
That's my recollection.
See if I can find it.
Okay.
So, I mean, access to data seems to be one issue that's, I do have some significant concerns around. The indemnification language I'm still struggling with because it seems to be so boilerplate, and I'm trying to understand, you know, obviously the city does not want to typically release other organizations from liability. I understand that, but it seems to be that they are suggesting that they're being released. We are suggesting that no police should be engaged in unarmed crisis response. That would be our police, let alone Michigan State Police. And so, under what circumstances, you know, would this actually become a scenario where we might be able to have to worry about it? I recognize now we're talking about legal risk, and so I don't know if that's appropriate for this context or if that's illegal. A closed session, or if we continue.
But I can answer the question generally this way. You're taking on all risk of the state police. So we have no idea what they're going to do. But for example, somebody comes in, just by example, the state police call the city, say, we want to come in and look at your records. They come in and look at the records. They see something they like. They file charges against something based on the information that we provided, and then they get a lawsuit regarding a constitutional violation, some warrantless search issue, and we are responsible for it. So that's just an example. I mean, it's just an example. We're basically taking on all responsibility. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know, what they're going to do with the information to get from the program. So a although, you know, that's just by way of example. But it's sort of a limitless paragraph to some degree, and that's why that would concern us in terms of taking on that responsibility.
Kevin, can I follow up and ask for if you lose a civil lawsuit alleging a violation of constitutional rights, what's the limit on financial damages that you can be awarded?
Well, I will say this: there's going to be attorney's fees involved and all kinds of other costs. And again, you know, you're asking us. I mean, it's interesting, John, because you're asking us to speculate things that we don't know. We don't know what the nature of a case would be, but we know that we would have indemnification language that would make us responsible for it. So,
this is admittedly a little bit outside the box, but I think the way the conversation is trending, I think we're both acknowledging the fact that we don't have an unarmed crisis response program, and we're acknowledging this point on kind of the legal risk of sort of signing away all of that responsibility on us. There is the way that a co-response program is contemplated here. There's a program that resembles that operating in Washtenaw County, run through the Sheriff's Office of co-response with social workers and police officers in the cars. Is there some way, you know, if we do get to a point where we were to say, we don't want to accept this grant to start our own program, would there be a way for either the city, well, let's just say it this way, would there be a way for the city to say, we'd like to give this money to the county to continue their program that already exists, that already serves Ann Arbor because it's, because the police contract with the CMH co-response, like, is there a way we could say, give this to another program that could expand its operations in Ann Arbor that's already police involved? I don't know, it's pretty out of the box, but I was just wondering.
I could probably speak to that a little bit. That would have to be probably in the form of a grant to the county. The way it's written now is on a reimbursement basis. So we have to supply all the information for how we use the funds in order to get reimbursement to 25% match. So it would be a totally new grant, but that's what I'm saying would have to be changed. I think it would be a lump sum, and we'd have to.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about the ways in which the risks associated with the inspections and audits and indemnification would be different if under a UCR model versus using the grant for our existing supportive connections program?
Do you mean in the sense that, you mean the existing program that we have sort of? Well, I think I guess I can answer it generally and just say it's just a matter of who is in control of what happens. If the city had its internal process that we put in place through supportive connections, then the city would have the ability to control like who sees the information and how that's involved. There wouldn't be, since there's no third party, there's no sort of indemnity necessary, there's no protection necessary. I think what's happening here is, the way that I understand it is really what the state police is kind of asking for, and they may not see it as, ultimately the state police we know needs statistical information, and I think this has been something that's been discussed, is that if we could limit the information they were getting to statistical information and otherwise, it would sort of solve one problem, because then they wouldn't be kind of coming in looking at records. It's not clear to any of us why they have a need to look at the actual records if we're providing the services. Seems to be simply just providing the statistical data or some other information that would be put together would solve that problem. But it's I'll just say this, for us, it's a very odd request for them to be able to do this. And if you looked at the information, it's very specific. They can come in within 24 hours. They can look at unredacted documents and then make a request for redacted ones. But once they have the information, it's pretty easy to get around the redactions. So I think that particular issue, as John has talked about, these were pretty reasonable things I think that the city was asking for, just to make sure that, I'll just say, just to make sure that the citizens get the program that they're looking for. We don't see this as sort of being, it seems to be much more of us trying to get the contract language to meet the policies in the program that the city has been trying to pursue, as opposed to us looking for sort of special language. It's really just us trying to get the thing that the council has been really working for the last several years.
But it's an interesting question, because I think what you're getting at is, if they can come in and do this kind of inspection and we're just giving the money to the existing supportive connections program, how are we protected? In that case, it feels like there's already police involvement. It's clear that it's a full response. It's our existing program. And we're not sort of promising to the community any kind of confidentiality in these records than they're otherwise, entitled to. Mm-hmm. So if the same language of the inspection was in there and we used it for that program, I feel like it's slightly different, because we're not saying like this is completely confidential, this is completely divorced from the police. Mm-hmm. When in fact it's not. Mm-hmm. They're coming in and they're looking at stuff.
Mm-hmm. And indemnification, just because there really aren't, there's no co-response involved in supportive connection. This is right. It's not something that, emergencies that are arising necessarily, right? It's more just support services being provided.
Right, and we might, like if we were going to do that, they might embed them, and it might be, a co-response program with our supportive connections or whatnot. But then it's not this kind of program where we're saying the police are not looking at these records. This is more like if the police are coming, there's a chance there's a police report and it's a public record. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you think you're getting into a protected crisis response situation, you don't expect that. And so our indemnification provision then comes into play, because then it's like, is there an end run around the Fourth Amendment? Mm-hmm. Are they coming in and getting records that they shouldn't be getting? Whereas if it was the Sport Connections, those records, we wouldn't have the problem with the Fourth Amendment issue, because they would be in a police report. Mm-hmm. It would be available to the police. Mm-hmm. I think the indemnification would be less.
It would have to be a separate community expectation, since you'd be taking the money to sort of expand something else. I don't know that this is the unarmed response that the city has been working for.
No, it's not. In my mind, it would simply be, oh, great, there's grant money now to help supportive connections. That's completely separate and different from UCR, and we're going to continue working on UCR. But hey, free money for supportive connections, great.
But are there other provisions in this grant document that supportive connections doesn't quite meet? As in, people aren't, at this point, right, people aren't necessarily calling supportive connections for minor crimes. They might be calling for help or for other, maybe that falls into it, but it's not seen as a specific, like, when it says this, like, to respond to behavioral health, substance abuse, disability, and low-level nonviolent nuisance complaints, does it stop fitting that definition, or is it kind of already there because it's a number that people call?
I wish I could speak more to that. I just don't have enough information about supportive connections. And it definitely would be, if they were even willing to give us the money for supportive connections, we would really have to look closely at how are we going to keep those things separate. Because if we do the unarmed crisis response, is that going to be at all connected to our supportive connections? How do we make sure that this information is totally protected? There's no search, there's no Michigan State Police, and this information there is. So that there's a lot of details that would have to be worked out, and I don't have enough information about the program itself or how that would work.
I think we have to, and especially if we're talking about this, we have to be absolutely sure that this would protect the city's future ability to create the unarmed crisis response program that we were looking for. This would operate over here, and we need to make sure that would foreclose the opportunity for us to do something else.
Yeah, okay.
If I could just to clarify, I mean, supportive connections though is like, it's not like I'm calling because I'm in some sort of public safety type emergency. I don't think so. This is, yeah, and so it's very different from UCR. Right.
But the grant is, right?
Right. But could we finagle, right, is the question. Yeah. Mm-hmm. To use it for that.
Since we seem to be now brainstorming how we could use this money for other opportunities, since it doesn't seem to be fitting for our other crisis response program.
Yeah, it's a different thing.
So I know you mentioned the county. I think that's an interesting story. I think this is also interesting. I was also wondering if we've had internal conversations with the police department. Certainly in my last board meeting with them, they were talking about, it's obviously not an unarmed crisis response, but as a community response, crisis response program that would be focused more on the downtown community. They're having a special building up, sort of a special group that's going to be operating from, I think, Thursday through Sundays. Obviously, that's already anticipating a police co-response, but it seems like our department is already trying to look for creative ways to be able to respond more effectively with in a co-response model. And so I'm just curious if we've had this conversation with police chief around this grant as we've started struggling with expectations.
I can't speak for John. I have not had conversations with the chief specifically about this grant. He's aware that the grant's there. He's aware of the struggles, but we've not talked about potential applicability of the funds towards, and his is a deployment model.
Right.
John, have you talked with them about that?
No, I've really just been focused on trying to hammer language out with the Michigan State Police.
It seems like, I mean, if we're finding this is just not going to work for the development of our unarmed crisis response program in terms of how that's been working, I would like to at least have conversations with, exploring some of these other opportunities that might be out there. Certainly some of the things that Jade Henderson's been talking about seem like they are trying to expand the programming and a response model in a way that is, certainly in line maybe with the grant expectations here, and also with our community's hope for a different sort of response model in the downtown. So not to the full level of what we're talking about in terms of crisis response.
So I also just wanted to, my understanding was the indemnification language was added relatively late in this process. That wasn't part of the initial language, the contract. And it was added as a result of some of the asks that we were making. Have we engaged with the state police at all on that piece since it's been added in? And I guess acknowledging that that's a serious issue no matter which path we take forward. It poses potential risk. Is that something that we've engaged with them on? I know that Attorney Cower has mentioned she'd be willing to talk to them more about that.
We have not. When we got this last version of the grant language, I met with them directly to hammer language out. We came to a verbal agreement in that meeting about what would be in the grant agreement, and we thought that what we agreed to in the meeting would be acceptable. And when we got the grant back from them, it contained language, including this indemnification language, that we did not agree to. And at that point, we all met internally and thought, we're not really getting anywhere with the Michigan State Police. We're not really making progress, is what I will tell you.
And then I guess maybe this is a question for Jacob, but I don't know if you're going to be able to answer it. On this front, I know that we've kind of passed the deadlines for accepting this money and are continuing to negotiate as we're having these conversations here about other ways that we might be able to meet the expectations of the grant with existing programs. Do you have any sense of how much patience or time MSP is going to have for us to kind of continue negotiating? Because I would hate to see us turn this money away.
What I can say is I cannot speak for the department. On behalf of Representative Morgan's office, we are always willing to work with the department, with the city, to try and find a solution that works. We want to find a way to get to yes. But I don't have the ability to answer that question for you. I'd have to defer to the Michigan State Police on that, and the same for you folks as well. I can only represent, Representative Morgan and not the department.
Similarly, I guess what you'd also then, along the lines of, I think what I think what you've heard, and as we communicated, I'm sure with state police, is that the strictures of the grant are in place for a program that we don't have, nor are we looking for. There is, however, an adjacent program in our context, Supportive Connections, which seems to, without myself actually knowing the statutory purpose of the grant program, at least it rhymes with what is incoming. And I guess, from as you've indicated, Mr. Kuhn, trying to get to yes solution, it seems like that might be a place where we at least would not be putting ourselves in an unwelcome policy position on unarmed response, nor if we could move to a Supportive Connections grant, nor are we putting Morgan in a position of having, and the office's position of having worked a good deal to do the good work to get us this money, and then starry-eyed Ann Arbor messing it all up. And so I'm wondering, I guess that sounds like a fruitful path from our perspective. I'm sure it's a fruitful. I'm sure it's a path you'd be willing to take with us from an office's perspective. And as I hear you, do you have any guesstimate as to whether or not that's a path that state police would say, fine, whatever, like it's close enough. Let's keep talking.
I really don't want to speculate on the department, and I can say as well, I know that this indemnification clause has been brought up a couple of times, and you're talking about the policy position that may put you folks in. I know that I can confirm that was not discussed in the meeting that all of us had together. That's the last time I've had a formal discussion about this issue as well, and I know that was added in due to the changes that were made from the original grant language. And that was something their legal team was told that they would have to put in at that point. So I think that the folks on that call that are, at least in terms of hammering out that grant language, I think they are very willing to continue to work. But I don't know about timeline, and I don't know what their legal department will say. So I can't answer that.
Okay. Well, it seems like with the next step, with respect to indemnification, if that was a response to our concerns with respect to taking the grant in connection with an unarmed response program, if our goal, if we can try to get to accepting the grants in connection with Supportive Connections rather than a fully fledged unarmed response program, it seems like we're accomplishing a couple of things. We are, enabling us to get to language that is a little more standard, that is to say, the non-blanket indemnification. Some of our data and other concerns wash away because we're not talking about, from our perspective on our response, we're talking about the existing and accepted Supportive Connections.
I think that just aspects to expand. Supportive Connections is a good one to expand. I would also like us to have a conversation with Chief Anderson, because really trying to develop a program that doesn't appear to have enough funding to actually operate throughout the entire week. And so it's a limited time period of, trying to identify one of those time periods. I don't know if this would be a good opportunity or not, but it seems to be in line with a lot of what our community has been asking for based on the sort of rough scope that I heard, in a brief period of time. So I would want to have it fleshed out and, it seems like there might be additional opportunity and need.
I'm absolutely open to having that conversation with them. I think it would be a bigger leap for me to take money that was intended for unarmed response and then provide it to a police program. But
It's the police giving.
right, but for the intention of
So I think the directionality so what I hear, the directionality I hear from the meeting is that the data concerns and the like are indeed inconsistent with our policy conversation on a full bore actual solo response on our response program. And that we are reluctant to spurn the good work done by Rep. Morgan's office and to leave money on the table. Therefore, we are looking to have a hopefully short turnaround conversation with the office, the department, and also all meeting staff all as to alternate adjacent uses that do not give rise to the same data concerns and, as a consequence, in all likelihood, indemnification concerns. Does that seem? It's clear. It's in some world it's practical. I just don't know whether we live in that world. Mr. Forner?
So, I have a couple thoughts. Is that if we want to get rid of the indemnification language, we have to add the language back in saying that the program will not respond to criminal calls for service. If we're trying to route the program through supportive connections, that may be irrelevant because they don't actually respond to calls for service.
That was my point. Yeah.
But it is also clear to me in the boilerplate language in the state budget that this money is intended for a crisis response program. I don't know how much we can stretch and define that to include supportive connections. But it's not, I don't think that's what most people colloquially would think of when they think of a crisis response program. So I think that issue needs to be teased out. I still think the state police will have issue with the inspection of records language. They have been, and the rationale that they've provided to me for that language, for not changing it, is they admit fully that they're very unlikely to ever inspect any records in the city, but they are not interested in changing their standard grant language and making an exception for Ann Arbor because they don't want that change in the grant language to proliferate to other cities and other agreements. So that, that inspection language could still be problematic for supportive connections, and I don't want that to go unheard. So I think we owe a conversation with supportive connections about whether, and an analysis from the attorney's office and from the administrator's office about whether the money can be appropriately channeled in that way, in a way that's still helpful for supportive connections.
And with the state police to make sure that this won't have an effect on the future program that the city wants to have. Hopefully it's gotten one. Something
to keep in mind about these funds is, and Jacob, correct me if my understanding is incorrect, but these are legislatively directive funds that have been carved out of or added to, but still part of an existing grant program. And if the city of Ann Arbor declines, theoretically, I'm not saying that we should do that, but theoretically, if the city of Ann Arbor declines the funding, it reverts back to its original purpose under the intended grant program. So the Michigan State Police, I'm not saying that they have an incentive to not agree with us. Certainly they want to make, follow the budget protocol and carry out the directives of the legislature and work well with Representative Morgan, but they aren't completely at a loss if they don't agree to language with the city of Ann Arbor. So I just as a means of laying out some of the different leverage points here that the city has, or lack of leverage points.
Right.
our leverage flows through Representative Morgan and his immense power as a state representative.
Excellent. Understanding those challenges, it seems like that's the most of our various paths, that's the most likely to result in Ann Arbor happiness. Whether that's actual likelihood or not is, I guess, TBD. But if we can directionally ask staff to move forward on that basis, and we'll take it and see what happens next. That seem reasonable?
We will work on it.
Do what you're asking.
All right. Julie, does that all ring like a reasonable plan and maybe works, maybe doesn't?
Yeah, we're always willing. We want to be a good partner to the city, and that's really what we're here for. We want to support your folks' missions. We want to make sure that we're getting good data back to the state, so hopefully we can continue to see the effectiveness of programs such as these. And I think that a lot of this might even just be bogged down. And I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if any of you on council are lawyers, but I think that as far as MSP's intent with their grant language and how it is legally interpreted can sometimes be two different things. Like I think in our meetings, they have been very clear. They don't want access to personal information or anything like that. And once again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't read the grant language in that way of what is technically possible or legal or as far as inspections and whatnot. But I do believe that MSP is trying to be a good partner, and as like I said, we also want to help where we can, and we want to see you guys succeed. So,
all right. Well, let's vibe in that direction. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mahoney, City Administrator. Yeah, there's got to be some granola around here somewhere. That's what I said. Mr. Mahoney, who's your own again?
No updates for today.
The city attorney's office have any updates in the regrettable absence of the store?
No, we.
All right. Is there any informational or upcoming business?
We have a annual city EDA planning session, a board session, and that is the second Monday in October. No, it'll be Tuesday due to Indigenous Peoples Day, and that will be at 6 p.m. And then our annual council planning session will be the second Monday in December at 4 p.m. in the council chambers. Excellent.
Thus ended the upcoming business. I'll observe we now come to public comment, and we do have a member of the public, in all likelihood here. If the person at phone number 901 would like to speak at public comment, please raise your hand now by entering *9. Seeing no one, public comment is closed. On a motion to adjourn, please move by. Mr. Gina Briggs, discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Or adjourned?
Very nice.